Welcome to the Sports Podcast that will put you in the zone all the time. Welcome to Pac Sports Zone with me, your host, Peter Pacman Clarke. What's up, guys? We're here for another episode of Pac Sports Zone, and this episode we're really going to get into football mode. I have an interview with Troy Renck of the Denver 7, who covers the Denver Broncos. I also have another interview with Jim Wyatt of TennesseeTitans.com covering the Titans. So two interviews that I'm going to have coming up today. So it's not really going to be much time for too much sports, but there's not much anything really going on right now. You don't have soccer is going to start their Premier League in a couple days on Friday. You also got not much going on with baseball that happened since last week, and we'll talk a little bit more about baseball as we get closer to the divisional races at the end of the year, but that'll be later on in the year. NBA is still going through free agency, as after we had the initial burst of signings, it's been a lot of cooled down stuff now. So we'll get to all those other sports. We'll even talk about wrestling a little bit more, because next week we will have a special wrestling show for SummerSlam, and I'll have a special guest on for that. But for right now, we're going to talk football. And let's get right into it. We're going to start off with my interview with Troy Renck of Denver 7 this week. He's going to be talking about the Denver Broncos. We had a good conversation about that. So let's get right into that. And I'm joined now by Troy Renck of Denver 7. Troy, thank you for joining Pac Sports Zone.
You got it, my man. Thanks for having me on.
Troy's been on the show a couple times before, going over the Broncos stuff. He's always talking about sports on Twitter, whether it's the Broncos or whether it's the Avalanche or Rockies, everybody. So he's a big sports guy out there in Denver, Colorado. Troy, I just wanted to ask really quick, just before we get to the meat and potatoes of the Broncos, because this was obviously the rumor in Green Bay. At any point, did you think that Aaron Rodgers may have been playing in Denver this year?
You know, right around the draft, that day of the first round, there was just a lot of buzz. Something could happen based on sources I was talking to. They're like, hey, it might happen. They weren't saying it would, but saying it might. And as soon as they got past the first round with their selection, it just felt like from that point on, Peter, that it was going to be a little bit of a long shot, because that draft pick was huge collateral in terms of a deal. And once they made the selection, I put them, in a worse position to try to make a deal. But, hopeful. I know Broncos country was hopeful. They've had 10 starting quarterbacks, Peyton Manning, and only 2 have a winning record, and Trevor Siemian and Brett Rippon. So I think Broncos country was hopeful. But once the first round of the draft passed, it just didn't feel real likely, even though it was in the news for the next few months.
Yeah, and I know it made sense, too, because when you look around the league, first they would have wanted to go to trade him to the AFC, obviously. And you look at the Broncos team right now with the solid offensive line, they have good run game, really good young wide receivers, the defense. So it almost kind of made sense. So it's almost like everybody was putting the tea leaves together.
Well, and he likes Denver. He's been to Denver several times. His fiance is very familiar with Boulder. She likes it there. So that was part of it. Like you said, AFC, and he was going to kind of steer where he wanted to go. And so I think ideally it would have been Los Angeles, but neither of those teams need a quarterback, having landed Matt Stafford for the Rams and Justin Herbert's a franchise quarterback for the Chargers. So that left Vegas and Denver. And he's very familiar with Denver. He's been there a lot. So that's why you start connecting the dots. But there just wasn't a lot of incentive for the Packers to move him. They got stuck. I mean, they didn't think he would be that good. If they did, they wouldn't have drafted Jordan Love and moved up for him. But they know clearly that Jordan Love's not ready, so they weren't going to trade him. And Rodgers, while he could have walked away from $35 million, given his wealth, it's just hard to walk away from that and a team that's a contender. It's different if he was walking away like when Carson Palmer said he wasn't playing for the Bengals anymore 10 years ago. Well, they weren't a Super Bowl contender. Yeah. Rodgers knows they can run it back for one more year in Green Bay, which I do think will be his last year there this season. And they could still, they have a decent chance to get to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, and he can win another MVP and make himself even more valuable. So, look, just to get to the Denver Broncos now, what in your opinion, after seeing the camp early and seeing what the expectations are, what do you think their biggest strength is, and what do you think their biggest weakness is?
Yeah, I mean, their defense is going to be better with they revamped their secondary, signing Ronald Darby, Kyle Fuller, and drafting Pat Surtain. That gives them a realistic chance to cover differently, to mix and match covers, play some matchup zone, play a little bit of man, just do things that they haven't done. Certainly they didn't do last season when their secondary was a wreck. So that's a strength, clearly. And then when you look at the run game, as you mentioned, with Melvin Gordon and the rookie Javonte Williams from North Carolina, that should be a strength of this team. Their offensive line should be a little better with the improvement of Lloyd Cushenberry. And you got to figure out right tackle. That's been an issue forever. But those are the two strengths. And I do think if Broncos country is being realistic, and I've learned this especially the last year and a half, you just stop looking at the quarterback to win games for you. As much as it pains him to say, they need their quarterback to be a game manager with this defense and run game and not lose games. And it stinks to say that for a fan base that saw Peyton Manning play. But the idea that Teddy Bridgewater or Drew Lock's going to wake up one day and suddenly be the reason they win games, I just think that's an unrealistic expectation. This team is built to win with a run game and defense. I don't like that in the modern NFL because you got to score 25 points a game. But early in the season, they can win that way for sure.
And don't forget, when they won their Super Bowl, Peyton didn't have the greatest arm at that time. He was winning games with his mind during those playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, he turned the ball over a lot that year. At one point, he had like double picks to touchdowns. But the confidence in him never wavered from the team. That's the difference. When you play with a legend, an iconic player, even though he was bad at times, I would talk to players and they'd be like, there's no thought of him not coming back. And they wanted him to come back for the Super Bowl run. And he exuded a presence and leadership that is hard to describe that Brock Osweiler never could have matched. And that's why even though the statistics tell a story of a guy who wasn't very good that last year, players will tell you he still gave them confidence in the huddle when he walked in. And that has not been the case, with Bridgewater and Locke. They've got to prove that. Yeah. Guys like Locke, he's just wildly inconsistent. Yeah. Guys like Teddy's just a guy who's just kind of shrugged shoulders. His career's not bad. Yeah. So we'll see. This is maybe the year they finally figure it out and if they just get adequate quarterback play, they should be in the mix for 9 to 10 wins.
How are they looking right now at the quarterback position with those two? How are they looking at camp? I know that. Is it right now looking like it will be Teddy and Locke behind him, or does Locke still have a chance to win the job?
No, Locke still has a chance to win it. I have it Teddy slightly ahead in the first 10 practices, so 5 practices for Teddy, 3 for Drew, 2 days where I called it a draw. But, I mean, it could easily be 4-4 and 2. It's that close. And honestly, I don't think either one of them is good enough to secretariat and run away with it. Mm-hmm. So it's going to come down to a philosophical decision for me. Do you want veteran in Teddy, who takes care of the ball a little better than Locke? He's not great at it, but a little better than Locke. Or do you want the young kid with the higher upside? For the future of the franchise, it's better if Locke's the starter. Yeah. And then you've got a guy you can look to and say, okay, the next 2-3 years, he's our guy. But the context of this quarterback derby is that Vic Fangio's 0-7 in September as the Broncos head coach. Wow. He cannot get off to a poor start again and survive and keep his job at season's end because the way the schedule gets tougher down the stretch. He's got to win. He's got to win. And that's why people ask me, I give Teddy the slight edge because I think they're going to look at it and say, Teddy, the first month of the season gives them a better chance to win. Mm-hmm. So they could go 2-1. And then I could see Teddy struggling against Baltimore and Denver and then at Pittsburgh and then Drew coming in. Mm-hmm. I think both are going to play, honestly. But it's been uninspiring in training camp. It's been pretty boring. Mm-hmm. I just don't think either one of them is good enough to run away from the other. But I'm in Minnesota now, and they have joint practices with the Vikings tomorrow and Thursday in the first preseason game. So maybe we'll see some separation then. But right now, we haven't, and I think it's going to come down to a philosophical decision. And I think if push comes to shove and they're even, the coaching staff would lean with Teddy early in the year.
Gotcha. Now, Cortland Sutton, he's a guy who, obviously, when we talked a couple years ago, Emmanuel Sanders was still there. He was still the number one. And we were waiting for Sutton to break out. And he did have his breakout year, and then he got hurt last year. How is he looking in camp right now? Is he still trying to work through the kinks of coming off the injury, or does he look back to what he was a couple years ago?
He he's still working his way back. He's physically, I think he's fine. He's just trying to get over that last stage, the mental hurdle of can he cut on a dime? Can he jump up and win a 50-50 ball and not worry about coming down awkwardly? He's still working through some of that. Right before I left for the Hall of Fame, I think that was Thursday. That was clearly, or was it Wednesday? Clearly his best practice. He looked more like himself. Now, they have time. The opener isn't until September 12th. But I think he's going to be good, and I think he's got a chance to be a Pro Bowler this season. But honestly, their best offensive player this entire offseason has been Jerry Jeudy, and it hasn't been close. So that's why I wonder if Sutton, if they ease him back in, and Jeudy at the end of the season ends up with bigger numbers than Sutton, just based on what my eyes are telling me. But I'm never going to count Sutton out. He's a tough guy. He's a leader. They missed him last year. I just think we probably should temper expectations in September. I think you're going to, like Bradley Chubb last year, you'll see the best of Sutton at the end of September moving forward.
And I really like Jeudy. When they took him, I thought it was a steal. I couldn't believe that the Raiders passed on both him and CeeDee Lamb, because I had those two as by far the best two wide receivers in that year's draft. But regarding the third wide receiver, that's something that nobody's really talking about. Is it really a Tim Patrick versus KJ Hamler thing, or is it somebody else that you think may break through?
Well, Hamler would be the guy that could break out if he's healthy. He is a problem. When he gets into space, he's so quick. Patrick really plays Sutton's position. That's why I do wonder if Jeudy becomes a star, if then Sutton only has one more year here and they ride with Patrick, because I don't know that they're going to pay two receivers big money. Yeah. I mean, they could use all the weapons they can get, but Tim Patrick, for me, he was probably their best or most dependable offensive player last year. Melvin Gordon ended up solid the last 8 games, ended up with 10 touchdowns, but Patrick was probably the most dependable throughout the course of the season. But Hamler is a difference maker in the slot. Can they get him 35 to 40 catches for 500 yards, 5 touchdowns? I mean, he has shown that kind of capability so far in training camp. His issue's been hamstring issues. He's just having trouble staying on the field. So if he can stay on the field, that gives them an additional weapon they just didn't have last year. I mean, he had a couple nice games at Carolina and at the end of the Chargers game, but he just he didn't have the number of reps that you'd want because he was just dealing with a hamstring issue. So he's someone to keep an eye on. He and Noah Fant. Noah Fant should end the year as a top 10 tight end in the National Football League if their offense is going to get to 25 points a game, which for me it has to if they're going to be a playoff team. Noah Fant has got to be a bigger. He's got to be a bigger priority on third down and in the red zone. They just seem to forget about him for large courses of the game, and that just cannot happen this year.
Yeah, I had big hopes for him last year before he got hurt. I thought he was on his way. He started out the year really good last year, and I thought he was on his way to becoming a top 10 tight end last year.
Absolutely. He's been dinged up. He's a big guy, so he's had some ankle issues where he gets hit, and he stays in. He's tough, but it ends up affecting him. Where he's like, oh, he's got a big game, and then you see him limp off, and he doesn't leave the field, but he goes from 3 catches, 42 yards in the first 2 drives, and then he doesn't get another catch. And they really just have to prioritize him around the end zone and on third down. He's got to do a better job too, but he's worked hard at it. And again, if they're going to be a playoff team, we can't look up at the end of the year and have him with 3 touchdowns. That just won't work.
Definitely agree. How's the running back battle you mentioned earlier with Melvin Gordon and obviously the rookie second-round pick Javonte Williams? How's the running back battle going? Because usually when you take a running back in the second round, he's going to get a big chunk of it. But Gordon had a solid year last year. How's it going right now?
Well, Gordon's looked great. He looks quicker. He's a workout fiend. So it wasn't like last year he showed he's out of shape. His workouts were different. And I think he might have, overtrained and got a little too big and strong. Because this year, he just has more burst through the hole. He's just quicker. He looks lighter on his feet. Again, he had a good year last year. It was just really complicated by the fact that Bronco fans didn't want him. He was taking the money and job from Philip Lindsay, who was probably their second most popular player behind Von Miller. Yeah. And then he got arrested for a DUI, eventually cleared. Just a lot of stuff going on. But the second half of the season, he was right at 5 yards a carry over the last 8 games. He finished with 10 overall touchdowns. He's looked good in camp. I do see them just riding him early. And then Javonte Williams getting a bigger share of it as the season advances. Javonte Williams is the future for them at that position. It's just, when does that future start? Is that game 8? Is it game 12? I think they will need both of them to get where they want to go to cross the finish line. But they've got Gordon in a good position because he's motivated to get a new contract, even though it's unlikely to happen in Denver. And he looks great. I mean, he just looks like he's quicker on his feet. So that's a good spot to have Gordon going into a walk year.
Yeah. And we've been talking a lot about the offense, and that's usually because the Denver defense is usually a good defense anyway. But with Von Miller out last year, it was very different. Now that he's back, do you see this being the same defense that it was a couple years ago, or is it a little bit different now?
With Von?
Yeah. Do you think the defense will be the same, where it's a heavy sack defense, put pressure on the QB, or are they a little bit different now?
Yeah, I mean, the problem they've run into, Peter, is their best players get neutralized because their offense is constantly trailing in football games. Mm-hmm. So the modern NFL is such that when you're trailing, teams are risk averse. So they don't expose their quarterback to the pass rush on 5- and 7-step drops on 3rd and 8. They could be on their own 25-yard line. That's right. We'll run the ball, we'll punt, because the Broncos' offense is stunk. Yeah. So Von's getting 2 or 3 good passes at the quarterback. The key is they stay within one score, so the other team has to, in the 4th quarter, pass the football. And you saw that with the best game Bradley Chubb played last year against the Jets. The Jets were trailing. They had to throw 3rd and long, and Chubb just wrote a diary of havoc. And that's what Von can do. Yeah. But Von can't do that if they're trailing 17-3 at halftime, and the other team just isn't going to throw the ball around. They just run it, and they dump it down. Everything's quick. And you look up and go, why is he not getting sacks? And so it's a little frustrating in that regard. But the defense will be more versatile this year. They will have better ways to cover because of their new cornerbacks, the 3 I mentioned before. And I expect Von to finish with minimum 20 sacks. Wow. They need to get Chubb back with his ankle. But the year they played together in 18, they had 26 and a half sacks. So the minimum for me would be them getting 20 sacks.
So I'll get you out of here with this kind of double question. 1, in your opinion, will the Broncos make the playoffs this year? And 2, what is your prediction for the final record?
Yeah, I don't see them as a playoff team, but I do see them with a winning record. So I'm threading a fine line here. Their home schedule is so easy. It's just a bunch of cupcakes. Even the problem is most opponents see the Broncos as a pastry now as well. But they should win 7 home games of their 9. Wow. They will be favored in that. If you just go chalk by Vegas, they would go 9-8, and that's what I have them at. But the only way that happens is if they play well at home against bad teams. The Lions, the Bengals, even Washington. They won their division, but they're terrible offensively last year. But they've got to beat bad teams at home, and then you sneak out a couple road wins. So I see them going 9-8 and just barely missing the playoffs.
All right, gotcha. I'd just like to thank you so much, Troy, for coming on the show, Pack Sports Zone. We hope to have you on later in the year. Once again, this is Troy Renck of Denver 7. Thanks, Troy.
Oh, thank you, my man. Thanks for having me on. All the best to you and your family. And if you need me on again, just reach out. We'll get it going.
No problem. Thank you. And that was once again Troy Renck of Denver 7. I appreciate all his insight on the Denver Broncos and camp and how they're doing right now. It sounds like they're ready to make that next step. They're right now right in that transition year where they can be right around 500, 9-win, 9-8, like he said. But they have a lot of good young people. Like I said, I really like Jerry Jeudy. They got Bradley Chubb there on defense to be the sack guy, to go along with Von Miller. Cortland Sutton is coming back for another year and after being injured. So they got a lot of pieces in there. It's going to be all about the quarterback. So, one thing to think about them for next year is we all know that this is probably going to be Aaron Rodgers' last year in Green Bay, and this was one of the destination spots for him. So I expect it to be the same next year because I don't expect Teddy Bridgewater or Drew Lock to stand out that much that they're not going to go after Aaron Rodgers next year. So if there's a solid bet on who he's going to go to, it's very likely either going to be the Denver Broncos or the Las Vegas Raiders. But moving on to my next interview, I had the pleasure of speaking with Jim Wyatt, who I've spoken to now over the past couple of years, and he's been a real good friend of mine in terms of helping me out with whatever things I need or whatever information I need regarding the Tennessee Titans. So just just to get to him, this was a great interview that I had with him. Talked a lot about the wide receivers, but let's just get right into the interview with Jim Wyatt. And we're here with Jim Wyatt of TennesseeTitans.com. Jim has been covering the Titans for over 20 years. He's a long-time insider for them, and I always depend on him for a lot of information. So, Jim, welcome to Pack Sports Zone.
Peter, good to hear from you.
All right, Jim, first thing I had to ask you is that, did you ever get a little annoyed by how many questions you got about Julio before they finally traded for him?
Well, it's funny, anytime there's like a big free agent on the market, fans, a lot of fans are clamoring to get him, and more times than not, it doesn't work out. And I can't say I knew for sure that it would work out in Tennessee. I think that there was always interest there. It always kind of made the most sense. But the fact that it did work out, I think all the questions, it was worth it just to see the reaction and the excitement from the fan base and really the players and everybody in the city. A lot of times you end up answering a lot of questions for deals like that don't come to fruition. So it was cool to see it happen. And now it'll be cool to see him play, when the season rolls around.
Yeah, can't wait till that gets started. But other than Julio and obviously A.J. Brown, how are the rest of the wide receivers doing? Is there anybody that's standing out?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. It's not really going as maybe some might have predicted at the start of camp. I mean, the fact that Julio has been sidelined, I don't think should be considered too much of a surprise. He didn't practice much in Atlanta, but I think going into camp, I think a lot of people were kind of chomping at the bit to see Julio and AJ and Josh Reynolds, the way things have played out. We've seen AJ, a good part of camp. He has been held out some, but we haven't seen Julio much. We haven't seen Josh Reynolds much. He's kind of been nursing an Achilles injury and has been slow out of the gate. What that's done is opened up opportunities for other guys. And, really one of the stars of camp has been Marcus Johnson, veteran, most recently, I think probably best known for his days with the Colts. I mean, he's consistently been really, really good in practices. I think Chester Rogers has played well in camp. I think Westbrook Akeem, Akeem seems to be, performing more consistently, especially of late. And now we're kind of, and Racey McMath has had his moments. The one guy who's kind of fallen back a little bit, I have to say, is probably Des Fitzpatrick. He got off to a little bit of a slow start in OTAs, and he kind of ended with momentum. And then it seems like with these other guys stepping up, he's kind of slid to the background a little bit. So most guys are taking advantage of opportunities, but certainly, there's still some time left for other guys to do it as well.
How many wide receivers do you think they'll keep? Because they're going to have a lot of wide receivers to decide between, and that's not even including Batson.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, I've seen them keep anywhere from 4 to 7. And again, covered the team for a long time. I think the year they kept 4, maybe they still end up getting somebody else after the cut deadline. That's really cutting it thin. But 7 seems high. Maybe you can do that if you keep one less tight end, but when you do the math, you can get there quick. Julio Jones is on this team. Josh Reynolds, A.J. Brown. That's 3. Marcus Johnson, I think, is making this team now. That's 4. Then kind of what happens. I think Nick Westbrook-Akine is on this team. That's 5. And then need a returner. And that's where you got maybe a Chester Rogers and a Cam Batson, I think, battling for one spot. Then you're at 6. So then what do you do? I mean, because, I talked about Fitzpatrick. Yeah, he's been slow out of the gate, but, he's a 4th-round pick. You want to give him more time. Racey McMath, has flashed. I mean, AJ compared him to Julio Jones earlier in camp. So you've got a lot of guys battling. I think that number's probably 6, and then maybe keeping some other guys on the practice squad. But the danger is if you cut some guys, they may not make it through waivers, and you may not get them back. So it's going to be interesting to see how the team treats preseason games and how much gives some of these guys a chance to flash.
Yeah. And last year we saw Anthony, you mentioned the tight ends, we saw Anthony Ferguson and how well he did, especially when Adam Humphries went down and played in the slot. We know he can catch, but he's always been criticized for his blocking. How is he doing and what is he doing to try to improve on that?
Well, part of it's gotten bigger. I mean, I think being a little bit sturdier, a little bit heavier, I think has helped him. I think he realizes that that's kind of the area of his game he needs to focus and improve on. I think he's gotten better, but he's always going to be known for his athleticism, his pass catching ability, his ability to kind of get open in space, and guys like Jeff Swaim and Tommy Hudson, and Luke Stocker, all those guys are here, kind of competing to play that role as a kind of sturdy on the line tight end. So Ferguson, doesn't want to have a situation where when people know if he's out there, they're throwing it. He's got to get in a situation where he can be dependent. They can depend on him to block as well. I do think he has tried to improve on that. It has gotten better.
Okay. How do you think the right tackle position is going to play out? Because we got 2 or 3 guys there that's going to be competing for that starting job.
Yeah, I think it's down to probably Kendall. I say down to Kendall Lamb.
Okay.
Bio, but I'm not going to exclude David Quisenberry just because how hard he's working, because of the respect they have for him. I'm taking Dylan Ravens out of that mix just because, and I felt like that. I do these position previews before camp, and I even said then he's got to have a hard time making up ground in training camp just because he's got some technique things he needs to clean up on, whether it's footwork or hand placement or just get out of the stance faster, and the speed of the game is just, it's a leap when you're going from playing at North Dakota State to playing in the NFL all of a sudden, and especially when you only played 1 game last year. So he's still developing it. It's interesting they listed him as a guard on the first depth chart. I think it's down to, again, probably Lamb and Sombrero are the favorites there. It's a competition. I'll be curious to see how it plays out in these preseason games. One thing that Lamb left practice this week, with the shoulder, didn't practice on Tuesday. And so we'll just have to see how long that injury keeps him out and whether that impacts the competition.
Gotcha. And obviously, I had to mention offensive line because the biggest cog in this whole offense is Derrick Henry. But in terms of having so many mouths to feed and everything, is Tannehill really the most important person in this offense right now?
Well, I think I think his role is going to be to distribute. And I'm not saying he is a game manager, and I'm not playing into some of this talk that a lot of people want to discount what he does by labeling him as a game manager and kind of lessening the impact he has on his team. Ryan Tannehill is capable of winning games. He's capable of slinging around. But his main job when you look at this offense now is to get the ball in the hands of your playmakers. And yes, we've talked about Julio Jones, we talked about A.J. Brown, we talked about Anthony Furcher, and obviously now Derrick Henry. I mean, as long as you put yourself in good situations to take advantage of those guys and get the most bang for your buck when you get their hands on the football, that makes Ryan Tannehill's job a lot easier. So he's got to stay healthy. He's got to avoid making turnovers. It's something he's done a good job of during his career. He's thrown some picks in camp. I'm not going to ignore the fact that's happening. And some of that, I think you got to give credit to the defense, and I think some of it you got to put it on the fact that he's working with some guys for the first time, and some of it is this new offense is still kind of a work in progress. But obviously important for him to stay healthy, for him to take care of the football, and to get the guys, get the playmakers, get the ball in their hands.
Mm-hmm. And now that we talked about the offense and everybody expects it to be a top 5, it was a top 3-4 offense last year. Now we got to switch to the side of the ball that everybody was getting on. Obviously, the big acquisition was Bud Dupree this offseason. He just came off the PUP list this week. How is he looking so far?
He's looking good. I mean, athletically, he's a specimen. He's tall, he's long, he's thick. I mean, I've obviously watched him from afar and seen him alive in games, but never really been really up close. And he is a grown man. I mean, there's no doubt about it. He's going to be lock. He's still working his way back from that knee injury. He's not 100% yet, but he is out there, and he is he's going to ramp up and do more as camp goes on. I think this defense, is looking a lot better in camp as far as making plays and playing together and communicating and playing with some energy. I'm looking at my board now, and they got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 different guys have had interceptions in camp this year. 16 of them all together. That's all four quarterbacks. That's coming from Tannehill. That's coming from Woodside. That's Kaiser, and that's Barkley. They've gotten them all. Hooker's got 2. Borders has got 2. Tyus Sparty's got 2. Jack Rabbit Jenkins has got 2. Several other guys have 1. So they're playing with a great energy, getting their hands on the ball. Some of them are just straight picks where guys have made plays. Some of them have been balls batted in the air. Guys are making plays. Some of them have come deflections downfield. They're making plays, and sometimes they're just taking advantage of mistakes. So, but I think that's a good sign. A lot of new faces in this defense. You're asking about Dupree, but Danico Autry, Jack Rabbit Jenkins, some of the young guys, whether it's Caleb Farley or Elijah Molden. Some of these guys could end up being factors this year, but then you have some other guys who are returners that they're going to really help as well, whether it's Hooker, whether it's Byer, whether it's Jayon Brown, Rashawn Evans, Jeffrey Simmons. It's a pretty good group, and I think it should be interesting to watch just how quickly things gel together.
And you mentioned Jayon Brown, and I thought that the defense, by watching them last year, their defense wasn't that bad until he went down, because obviously he was their best coverage linebacker. And with him back on a seemingly a 1-year deal with 2 extra years tacked on at the end, and Evans, they didn't take the 5th-year option on him. They took Monty Rice in I think the 3rd round, and then they obviously still have Long Jr. there. How do you expect those middle linebackers to play out?
Well, I think the hope is that Jayon has a really good year, and they're able to work out something that keeps him here long term. He's made it clear that this is where he wants to be. I think you're being overly optimistic if you think you're going to keep both those guys moving forward. I think probably it's one or the other. It doesn't have to be, but that's just me being realistic about the whole thing. And so I think obviously Evans, is in a position where he knows he needs to play better this year. Jayon, as you mentioned, I think it is true. I think the defense had a different look when he got hurt last year. They're going to be glad to have him back. I think that David Long has stepped in and played well when they've asked him to. I think that will continue. I think Monty Rice is still a developing player whose future, his best days are to come. But right now he's kind of learning and trying to be the next guy in line when that time comes. So I do think they've got some pretty good factors, pretty good playmakers in there, and they're going to need them to play.
Yeah. Any of those young guys in the secondary standing out so far?
I can't say Farley yet. I wish I could, but he just hasn't played. He hadn't been out there enough, and then when he has been out there, he's trying to work the rust off. Molden is going to be a really good player. He's still kind of finding his way as well. The best corners so far have been Christian Fulton, Jack Rabbit Jenkins, Breon Borders, and Chris Jackson. I think and all those guys have played well and made some plays in camp. Again, I think Molden and Farley, their time's coming. But the guys I noticed the most now in camp, corner, are Fulton and Jenkins, and I think Borders at this point. And then Jackson's playing a lot in the slot, so they're giving him a good run there and seeing what he can do. And so far, he's earned compliments.
And last year it was hard to describe this defense as anything other than either bad or below average. Do you think they'll be? What do you think they'll be this year? Do you think they'll be average, above average? Do you think they still have a lot to work on? How do you think the defense is going to be overall?
Well, I think they'll be above average. I'm not going to say they're going to be great because you got to earn that. But I do think they've got pieces that should make them take a big leap. And a lot of new guys in the mix. I think they got a good combination of returning players and then new blood that's going to help them improve. But So they've got they've got to prove it, and they've got to be able to rush the quarterback. I mean, I think Dupree helps, Autry helps up front. I think Jeffrey Simmons, those teams won't be able to focus on him as much because they'll have to worry about guys on the outside more. I think that helps him. Obviously you hear Landry to take another step. I think the secondary should be better, be more physical, be able to match up more where you're allowing other guys to roam and do some things as well. Shane Bowen really getting his first real run as the DC, where it's really his show. I think he'll be better this year as well. But some things you have to come together. I mean, you have to rush the quarterback. You have to get off the field on third down. You have to force turnovers and make plays, especially in the red zone. And I think if you can do that early, then you can build some confidence and start playing with a little bit of swagger. But last year it was just kind of, you couldn't stop the bleeding. You couldn't build confidence because you couldn't get off the field on third down, and you're giving up too many points, and it just was kind of a disjointed effort. Looking at this year's roster and looking at some of the developments this offseason, it ought to be a lot better. But again, you got to prove it, and schedule's not going to be easy.
You mentioned Harold Landry, and he was the guy the year before, and he seemed to have a down year. Is there any explanation for one, why he had the down year last year, and two, has there been anything in terms of the contract or negotiations for an extension with him?
Well, I think he's played too many snaps. I mean, that's and credit to him for just sucking it up and doing it. I mean, they didn't really have any choice. I mean, they've tried to find a consistent player opposite him, and it just hadn't happened for one reason or another. I mean, Clowney was supposed to be that guy last year, and then he just, he got hurt, never really did what he was supposed to do here. And other guys have flashed, but not been consistent, and they've had injuries there, and as a result, he just kept leaning on Landry to just keep playing. I mean, he's playing 90-95% of snaps. I think he just got worn down some years, and I think for him, what they worked on with him, he's obviously got a good, he's developed a good move that allows him to have success. And what they've tried to do is kind of expand his repertoire and make him work on other things in camp to make him better. So I think the hope is that he'll be a more all-around, versatile pass rusher this year. Unfortunately, he's been dinged a little bit in camp, and he's been a spectator some days, and hard to get better when you're not out there. So he just needs to stay healthy and get back on the field and just try to get himself in a position where he's ready to roll when the season starts in about a month.
Yeah. And I appreciate you once again coming on. What's your record prediction for this year? What do you think they'll be?
Well, I have to say, I used to do predictions when I worked at the Tennessean, but now since I started working the team, I don't do predictions anymore. I mean, if you got a 17-game schedule and I'm picking to go, 14-3 or 15-2, I'm the homer that works the team. And then if I'm picking to go 8-9 or 9-8, then people say, well, how's this guy work for the team? He doesn't even think he'll do any better than this. So I'm better off just kind of avoiding doing the predictions. I say that. And I say this every year. I mean, there's a wide range on what teams can do. I mean, this team can be really good, I think, and win a lot of games, and I think got a great chance to win the division again. But you've got to stay healthy, and you've got to be able to win close games because more times than not, games are coming down, to 3 to 7 points, and teams' ability to perform in those pressure situations are the ones that are going to end up with the best records and being considered as elite. So that's what these teams got to do. They got to be able to win these close games, and they've got to stay healthy and keep some of these guys we talked about on the field.
Mm-hmm. And I'll get you out of here with this last question. The Titans will be playing the Falcons this week, on Friday. So Julio obviously will get a chance to see some of his ex-teammates, but in terms now, there's 3 preseason games instead of 4. Before, when there were 4 games, it was a couple drives in the first game, then they play a quarter for the starters, then a half, then they rested the fourth game. How do you think that's going to play out now with how much the starters are going to play and now the preseason for the 3-game preseason?
Yeah, I'll be curious myself. I don't expect to see him much on Friday. Again, nobody's told anything to me about Julio and Atlanta, but I actually think I'd be surprised if he even makes the trip. They may leave it up to him on whether or not he wants to go back to Atlanta and see his old teammates, coaches, and fans. Part of me thinks that if he's not playing, because he hadn't been practicing, so does he really need to go on a preseason trip to Atlanta? I don't think so. So maybe he's there just because he wants to be and be with the team. But my suspicions kind of tell me he may be on travel, and I bet some other guys don't too. I would think some of these guys who have been limited and not worked a lot in camp, they're probably not going to play. And I think you're going to see this week and probably a lot of the preseason, a lot of young guys playing and getting an opportunity to kind of showcase what they have against other teams. The one that I'm curious about is the final regular preseason game against the Bears on the 28th, because you do have a full 2-week gap between the end of the preseason now until the start of the regular season, and that's a long lag.
Yeah.
If guys are not playing in that, then you're talking about guys that have played for 3 weeks. So I'll be curious to see how Vrabel and John Robinson kind of assess things and how much work guys need in that last game.
All right, John, and thank you again for coming on. This is Jim Wyatt of TennesseeTitans.com. Jim, I hope you're able to come on a couple times during the season. I appreciate your time.
Okay, Peter, have a great day. I appreciate you having me on.
All right, talk to you later, Jim.
Okay. All right, bye.
And that was my interview with Jim Wyatt of TennesseeTitans.com. It's always a good time speaking with Jim about my team, the Tennessee Titans. Listen, and I hope he was able to clear up a couple things. One, it does look like Lamb will be probably the leading contender for the right tackle. He probably cleared up some Twitter wars that were going on yesterday about the wide receivers regarding Josh Reynolds. Doesn't look like Josh Reynolds is going to be cut despite what people are saying on Twitter, or his explosiveness. Just because he's coming back and he's explosive, it doesn't look good from certain people in the media. Marcus Johnson is making a big run. Looks like he's going to make the roster. People will look like they're struggling a little bit. The rookie wide receiver, Des Fitzpatrick, who, when he got picked, I didn't like the pick at the time. I understand he has a great size and speed combination, but I just thought it was a pick that was a little bit early for his overall talent. Same thing with Racing Math, and it looks like they're the ones that are struggling to make a 6 wide receiver roster right now. As it's just a tough team. When you went into the draft here, you're looking at the team and you have just A.J. Brown, Josh Reynolds, and Cameron Batson there. And now you got so many solid wide receivers. You need one for special teams. You need one for returns. Chester Rogers coming out of nowhere. Marcus Johnson coming out of nowhere. And now the wide receiver room is so full, you don't know if you're going to keep everybody. So things could change really fast in the NFL. But I was really happy that he was able to also talk about the defense and how he thinks that they can go from bad to average, because when Jayon Brown got hurt, they were at least an average defense. When he got hurt, then they turned into a bad defense. And then to actually being above average because of Dupree, and he talked about the importance of having a special move, and that's what Clowney's missing. Clowney doesn't have a special go-to move. And I've talked with pass rushing specialists, and they've said the same thing. So that's the big problem with Clowney. But just moving on to next year, it's going to be a great year. Like I said, I'm going to have people like Troy, people like Jim on throughout the year. A couple of weeks from now, I'm also going to have some people representing Jeff Lloyd from the Browns. I'm going to have numerous people on there to try to give you some insight on teams. It's going to be obviously Antoine Staley from the Carolina Panthers. But just step back and start watching the preseason games that they'll be starting from Friday night. So it should be fun. May not see the starters too much this week, but it should be fun. Football's back. Next week, as I said, I will have a special SummerSlam wrestling show, as DeAndre LaBeouf will be actually on with me to talk over all the matches from SummerSlam. But until then, check in next week. Peace out, everybody.